Hello everyone, this is Bill Cline with North Carolina State University. This presentation will cover disease control in muscadine vineyards. The topics I'd like to cover, site-related problems, trunk and cordon diseases, fruit and leaf diseases. And once we get to fruit and leaf diseases, we'll go through identification, management and control, and then the fungicides, sprayers, and spray timing. First, site selection is the most important decision that you will make. Generally, sites that are suitable for tobacco are good for muscadine grape. We have a lot of experience with tobacco in North Carolina, but you need to look into the soil classification, the soil profile, and drainage. Most of the zones that you will find in North Carolina are irregular in shape, so be careful to lay out the field. And a useful tool for site selection is the web soil survey. You can enter the address, mark the corners of the property, and map the soil anywhere in North Carolina. What you're trying to avoid is what I'm calling wet feet, a site that's just too wet for muscadine. So in the picture here, you see some vines that are weak, and this is because they're in a wet area of the field. So really want to work on drainage and site selection before you spend a lot of money on vines and posts. Next, I'd like to talk about trunk and cordon problems, both injury and diseases. This is a picture of our muscadine vines at the research station in Castle Hayne, one day after the 2007 Easter freeze. And you see shoots that were not damaged, but also the ones in the yellow circles that were injured. And this is an indication of cold damage that is going to be a potential entry point for disease. And what was even more troublesome for us was the damage that occurred on younger vines. And on young vines, 1, 2 to 3 years old, the cold injury created this sort of messy wound that you see in this image, where the stem split and does not heal. And so this type of cold injury, if it's not removed, eventually winds up being a wound that never heals. And you can see this extreme example here of a cold injured shoot at the fork of the cordon, where the plant has produced callus tissue both above and below the injury, but just really never completely heals. And so this is just an ongoing problem for the vine. So the solution for this would have been to prune out that injured cordon, even though you have to regrow the entire cordon, just to avoid this type of injury. In this picture, you see a vine that was cut off and retrained following that cold injury. And this was a vine that was cut off and regrown in that same year following the Easter freeze. In the insert image there, you can see the new shoot trained up from the cut down vine. So this was cut off all the way down near the ground to remove the cold damage. If you don't remove cold injury or injury that occurs to cordons from being wrapped around the wire, the trellis wire, you eventually have a wound that does not heal, and it becomes infected by fungi like the Botryophilia cultures that you see in this picture. So these were culture plates in my lab where we were trying to determine what was killing some grape vines, and turns out most of it is Botryophilia. There are some other fungi there as well, but these pathogens will colonize these cold damaged grapevines and kill the vine on down the road, and it may kill the vine years later, but the initial infection occurs at that injury. Another image that we'll often get in the plant disease and insect clinic is orange slime, and this may be something that you've seen on grapevines. It is not a pathogen. This is just an indication that you have an injury. So the picture on the left, you see a trunk that is split and leaking sap, and what you're seeing are bacteria and yeast that colonize that sap flow from the injury. On the right, you see the same sort of thing at a pruning wound. So this is not a pathogen that you're seeing, not a sign of a pathogen, but but just a sign that that vine has been injured. Now, down the road, this vine might become colonized by Botryopsera or other fungi and eventually be killed. Another disease I sometimes get questions about is crown gall, because muscadines very often produce a gall response or a callousing response to a wound. The picture you see here shows a gall a little bit above ground level, probably from cold injury at the soil line. And then above the gall, you see these adventitious roots growing out of the trunk, almost like the plant is trying to reach down and reroot into the ground. So really can't say whether this particular gall is the crown gall pathogen. It's really common on muscadines, but it's usually associated with cold injury. Another sort of trunk injury that's fairly common is herbicide damage. This is gramoxone injury on the cultivar Noble that is about 2 years old or less. And these are young stems that were girdled by the herbicide. So the grower was spraying for weed control, and the herbicide hit the vines at about a foot off the ground. And just every vine in the row, you can see on the insert picture there, the girdling effect on each vine after vine down that row. The picture in the background shows the girdling on that grape trunk and some roots starting to form above that damage. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about fruit and leaf diseases. These are the diseases that we manage on mature, healthy muscadine vines over time. These pathogens build up on the muscadines, and so we'll take a look at what the fruit and leaf diseases look like, and then we'll talk about what you can do about them. First, I want to say muscadines are tough. They're a lot more resistant to disease than the bunch type grape. They don't get Pierce's disease or show very little symptom of Pierce's disease that kills bunch grapes. So that's why muscadines are grown in the Southeast. They're resistant to that bacterial pathogen Xylella fastidiosa. If you look at the list on the right column there, they're also don't get downy mildew. They don't get bunch grape anthracnose or botrytis gray mold. So there are a lot of pathogens that attack bunch grapes that we just don't see at all on muscadines. The leaf and fruit diseases on muscadines are mostly caused by fungi, and they're microscopic spores that are spread by wind or splashed around by rain or carried by insects, and they require moisture to germinate and infect. Generally, they're overwintering right up in the vine, so you'll see these old fruit pedicels or old grapes still hanging around up in the plant, and these are releasing spores in the spring and that infect the new emerging shoots. The fruit rots that we see most commonly are pictured here: macrophoma rot, bitter rot, ripe rot, and one that is a superficial disease that's very visible on bronze grapes, which is sooty mold. But these are the pathogens that we're applying fungicides to try and to control. Sort of in a class by itself is ripe rot. This is Calototricum, and this fungus infects the grapes really early on, around bloom time. But there's also a secondary spread with ripe rot, where once the grapes are fully ripe and you have infected fruit in the canopy, rain and insects can carry those spores from one grape to another, and so you'll have these hot spots in the vine where a lot of grapes rot from secondary spread of this fungus. Now, the leaf diseases are also mostly fungal pathogens. Bitter rot, black rot, and angular leaf spot are fungal pathogens of muscadine that can cause premature defoliation. And in the lower left corner, there's Pierce's disease. We'll say a little bit more about that. Pierce's is not a fungus; it's a bacterial disease, and muscadines are fairly resistant to Pierce's disease. On Carlos, it causes a marginal leaf burn. Also on some other susceptible cultivars, but it doesn't kill the vine. So you'll see, like as is pictured here, just a a burn around the edge of the leaf, but no further symptoms. If you see a leaf burn on muscadines and you're not sure whether it's Pierce's disease, take a close look at the spots. If it's black rot, you'll see some circular spots there, and if you look really closely, as you see in the inset in this image, you can actually see the fungus. You can see these little black pepper spots on the underside of the leaf that are the fruiting bodies of that pathogen. So once you take that close look and you see these fungal structures in the spot, then you can be assured that that's a fungal pathogen causing that disease rather than a bacterium or something else. Now, another really common fungus on muscadine fruit is powdery mildew. It's often hard to find on the young fruit, but it's a faint, white, powdery-looking growth on the surface of the fruit. And when you really notice it is when the fruit starts to get some size, and then you see this brown russeting on the surface of the fruit. It's a serious problem because the affected fruit has a tough skin that won't expand, so the fruit can't ripen normally, and very often the grapes will crack open. And just another shot here of powdery mildew symptoms. Again, it's a disease you don't really see in the active stage, but later on when the fruit get large, you can tell where the fungus has infected the grapes. Now we'll switch to management and control of diseases, talk about a few different strategies here. One thing I'd always like to mention is starting clean and staying clean, or starting with clean plants. If you propagate from diseased plants, you're likely to carry pathogens along with the plants. Muscadines are vegetatively propagated from cuttings, and if they have a problem on the mother plant, then that problem will be carried to the plants that are propagated from that plant. So I think the future of muscadine propagation is going to be having a mother block of tissue culture plants that have been tested for viruses and that are disease-free. And I think this is just a good strategy for anyone who's going to propagate muscadines either for their own use or for others. Muscadines have a lot of disease resistance, and I want to be sure and mention that dark fruited cultivars in particular are naturally resistant to many fungal diseases. So if I were growing muscadines organically and didn't want to use fungicides, I would concentrate on growing dark fruited cultivars that just don't get a lot of the fruit rot problems that we see on bronze fruited cultivars. As mentioned before, they're also resistant to Pierce's disease, downy mildew, botrytis. They're resistant to nematodes. They're not grafted, so if you have to cut the vine down, it will come back true to type. And they have few, if any, virus problems. Now, about fungicides, sprayers, and spray timing. This is our primary means of disease control on the bronze fruited cultivars that are susceptible to fruit rots. And the sprayers that are used are typically either an air blast type or a high pressure sprayer. With an air blast, you can use 40 gallons of water per acre. For a high pressure sprayer, I'd like to see 50 to 100 gallons of water per acre. You really want to use a lot of volume in order for the spray to reach the grapes underneath the canopy. And typically you'd like to have a sprayer that's oriented to blow upwards so that it's reaching the grapes underneath that curtain of leaves that occurs on muscadine grapes. Spray timing on muscadines is a lot simpler than vinifera grapes. There's just a lot of products we don't have to use. Generally tell folks to start spraying muscadines in mid-May when the shoots are 6 to 10 inches in length and before the flowers open, and continue every 2 weeks until early August. The early summer sprays are the most effective fungicides that you will apply because the products are mostly protectants. Write down what you do when you spray, and if you're not getting adequate disease control, you may need to start earlier in the season. The fungicides that are most commonly used are products like mancozeb, which has a 66-day pre-harvest interval, And then that's usually followed by a tank mix of Rally and Captan every 2 weeks. Where ripe rot is a problem, that's the disease shown in this picture, you want to replace or supplement the Captan with a different mode of action, perhaps a strobilurin fungicide like Abound or Pristine or Flint. This is just an interesting comparison. This was from 2016. I just took a look at Mizuho Nita's vinifera spray program in Virginia. And then on the right is the muscadine recommendation that I had in North Carolina at that time. And so, again, just to say that vinifera grapes require a lot more sprays, a lot more different fungicides in order to control the diseases that those grapes get that muscadines are resistant to. Now, to see the most recent recommendations, go to smallfruits.org and look at the 2022 Southeast Regional Muscadine Grape Integrated Management Guide. This covers not only diseases, but also insects and weeds. And we update this every year, put a lot of effort into it, and I think it's a really good resource. One thing I want to point out, especially about this year's Integrated Management Guide, is that we've added a lot of fungicides that weren't previously listed. The standards that you see on the left there in purple are the fungicides that we have a long history of using on muscadine grapes with good success. But there were a number of other products that are labeled for grape but had not been tested on muscadine. So in 2020 and 2021, we evaluated those products on muscadine, did not see any phytotoxicity, and we saw a lot of good activity from those fungicides. So the ones in yellow on the right are products that we have added to our spray schedule as options for growers to control muscadine diseases. And the ones with the asterisk beside them significantly increased marketable yield on Carlos. So I'm excited to have this expansion of the modes of action. You can see the FRAC codes listed there on the right, and so we have a lot more different modes of action now in our spray schedule that can be used for problem vineyards where something like ripe rot has gotten out of hand. This table is not easy to read. Just want you to be aware that it is in that regional guide. This is the efficacy of the fungicides against certain diseases of muscadine grapes. So you see the fungicides listed in the first column, and then each disease and how that fungicide performs listed in subsequent columns. So you can see what we know about each disease and each fungicide where they interact. And I also included this year a seasonal at-a-glance fungicide spray schedule. Again, this is not something you can read well on the slide, but you can print this page off, and it lists all the fungicides that can be used at the different times of year. Across the top of that first row, you see the growth stages of the muscadine grape, and below that the fungicides that can be used at each season. So this would be a guide here that you could print this page out, hand it out to growers. They can go through and highlight which products they want to use at which time of year and have their schedule planned out for the year. Now that's about all I wanted to cover. I appreciate your attention, and I hope this is useful for you. Be glad to answer any questions. Contact me anytime if I can help you. Thank you.